Hi everyone, thanks for coming. Just got a couple more sessions now until the fun starts this evening. Have you all got your wristbands already? Cool. All right, as long as there's someone behind me in the queue, I'm happy. So we're going to be talking about using Project Centennial, the desktop bridge, to bring Win32 apps across into the UWP ecosystem, into potentially the Windows Store, and talk a bit about what are the benefits that can bring. Just out of interest, how many people are using UWP? Okay, all right, that's good. I presume the rest of you have got Win32 apps you want to bring across. Cool. Nothing escapes me. Except perhaps how to use this. Okay. So, as the first thing, presumably, well, have you all heard of Project Centennial before coming in here? Yeah, okay. So I've heard some interesting perceptions about what it is and what it isn't, so I'll start off with a bit of info on that. And then I'll ask some basic questions. Why do you want to be looking at doing what we're talking about today? Now, presumably you've all got reasons. I've got a bunch up here. There might be some that you haven't considered yet, but we'll just run through those to start with. And then a little bit about how we approach it and how it does what it does, how it works, its magic. We'll then take a look at the actual conversion process, taking an MSI, putting it through, and getting an Apex installer out of the other side. There's a bunch of prerequisites, a bunch of things you've got to download and install before you can get there, so we'll look at what those are. And then walk through actually running a conversion and see what comes out the other side. So to start with, what is Centennial? Well, it is a bridge from Win32 to UWP. It will convert your MSI install file into an Apex install file. It won't touch your source code. It's not going to do any source code conversion. So that's up to you to gradually bring across. So let's take a look at some of the benefits you get. I've seen a number of estimates flying around of how many Win32 apps there are out there in the wild. This is the one I've seen repeated most, and by some Microsoft people, so I'm going with it. So we're looking at in the region of 16 million, which is an awful lot of code, a lot of lines of code, a lot of investment gone into that, a lot of testing, a lot of proving that it does what it's supposed to do. And programmers don't like to throw that away. Well, actually, maybe some programmers do, but... And then something maybe a little more contentious. Win32 doesn't have what we'd refer to as an app model or a concise definition of what an application consists of. There will probably have been at least one executable, a number of DLL files, a number of registry entries, a number of maybe config files. So as you go through the installation process, you're kind of putting your fingers out into lots of different parts of the operating system. And that's not something, as I'm sure you all know, that's ever been managed particularly well. And because of that, you can't ever guarantee a complete and clean uninstall. So the app model that we're moving to is contained, can't interfere with anything else, can't break anything else. So another of the reasons is once you've got your Apex installer, you can then move to the store and take advantage of some of the things you would get out of doing that. So potentially some payment options that may or may not be relevant to you depending on what it is that you're working with. One that does often get a lot of interest is the update mechanism. Instead of having to cleverly write something that will go and download and apply an update, but kill the program that's being updated so you can actually reinstall the update. None of that you have to worry about. Your users' machines can wake up silently 3, 4 in the morning, go check for an update, download it, install it, ready to run when the user wakes up. And you can also start the process, once you've got the Apex installer, of being able to run anywhere that a UWP app can run, whether that's Xbox, Surface, or HoloLens. Now again, depending on what it is you're working with, they may or may not be relevant, but it's at least nice to know that you're moving on to a path that has a future, that you've got some future proofing in there. The next thing I'm going to touch on is the installation experience. So there have been a bunch of third-party companies over the years giving you ways of packaging your application, making sure you've got everything in a managed way, making it a nice, hopefully reasonably frictionless process for the user. But it's still the case that you download, taking an MSI, you'll download the MSI, double-click that, and typically you'll get taken into an installation wizard where you've got to make some decisions about what type of install you want, make some choices, see if you take the custom one or if you're smart enough to use the advanced option. And then all through that you go next, 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 and eventually you start waiting while the installation actually kicks in. And then you'll go to bed or go get your lunch and hope that when you get back, it's not asking another question waiting for you to respond before it actually starts the installation process. And I'll harp on about that a little bit. So the approach now is with a single AppX file. Everything's contained in there, but it's a simpler process. It's a simpler user experience. Typically, you wouldn't have a bunch of choices to make during the installation. It can be, as I've said, deployed via the store or side-loaded in the same way that UWP apps can be side-loaded. But then you're talking about single-click installation. You can watch the progress if you want to, but you don't have to. And again, you take advantage of this auto-update and install. And the reason I've mentioned that again is when it comes to the auto-update, you get kind of a free of charge benefit. There are some smarts behind the download mechanism if you're going through the store. It's going to be doing some diffs, some file diffs behind the scenes, and only downloading things that have changed, only downloading parts of files that have changed. For me, the biggest of all these issues, and kind of why we want to make improvements in all these other areas, is consumer confidence. We want to know that our users can have confidence they can try our app without upsetting their device, without upsetting their PC, without needing to go and re-image because a new component that has been downloaded and installed that breaks compatibility with the previous version, and you're going to upset a bunch of applications you've already got installed. And by the same token, we want our users to have confidence that they can uninstall and know that the app is going to be completely removed and there are no adverse consequences of removing it. That way, if they don't believe, and this is probably more applicable in the mobile space, if a user doesn't believe that they can download and try an app and then remove it without upsetting anything, they're not going to download it in the first place. So that then comes on to all the other Windows 10 devices that you're looking at. So that's a bit about some of the whys. I'm sure you may have more reasons if you've been through these decision process already. But we'll start taking a bit of a look at the how now. So we'll start with an MSI installation file. And what you're going to be looking at doing is running through that installation one last time. Now, I say one last time a bit flippantly. Chances are you're going to want to still maintain your Windows 7 user base. So it might not be the last time that you run it. But you'll run that installation through the desktop converter application. That will fire up a virtual machine in a known state, run through your installation, monitor what happens, look at the state the VM is in afterwards, take that information, and build an AppX installer based on that. And then you've obviously got your test and fix cycle before deployment. Now that includes any registry entries your apps might be dependent on, any keys that they write, anything they need to be there to function correctly, as well as any config files. So how's it going to do that if it's not actually writing to the registry, if it's not actually writing to where your app expects it to be writing to in the file system? That's where it does some virtualization or smoke and mirrors. So calls to read to and write from the registry, read from and write to the registry, are intercepted. So without changing any of your code, your app is going to be duped into thinking it's working with the registry the same as it always did. In practice, behind the scenes, things are moving more towards the AppX model, the Windows 10 app model, and it will be contained. And you'll see a bit about that when we run through an example a little later. And the same applies to file system access. If you're reliant on reading a file from a certain location, again, your application can think that it's there, even if it's not, because the calls to read and write there will also be intercepted. So when we think about that, and think, okay, we're kind of bringing across all the good bits of Win32, but not any bad habits. And when I say bad habits, and this might be things that have, in years gone by, been recommendations of the way to do things. But if you're doing something like, I don't know, storing transactional data in the registry, probably shouldn't be doing that. You're probably going to hit problems and have some obstacles to overcome when you go through this process. So a bit about the why and the how. Let's begin to take a look at actually running through one of these conversions and what's required. So first of all, you'll need Windows 10 Anniversary Update, Professional or Enterprise. There's a number of ways of checking, or you can just run up a command window and check you're on 14.393. So I'm just going to run through each of these. Losing my pointer now because the resolution's so high on there. Okay, I'm sure you can all see really clearly that that's proving that we've got the right version of Windows. So the next thing you'll need is the desktop app converter tool. So there's the URL you can go to get that. That'll take you off to the Microsoft Store, download and install the desktop app converter. The next thing you'll need is a Windows base image for the correct version of Windows. So again, we're looking at 14.393 for the anniversary edition. That's about 3.3 gig to download, so I'm going to kick that off and go get a coffee. Fortunately, I did it yesterday on this virtual machine. And then you'll need the Windows 10 SDK. Now, you may well already have that if you've got up-to-date Visual Studio installed. If not, you can go and get it from there. Now, that's also around about 2 gig, I think a bit over 2 gig, so you're looking at 5.5 gigs. So depending on your connection, you might need a bit of forward planning here. I say that because I do work in rural parts of the country at times. It's not always as quick as you'd like it to be. So once we've got those components downloaded, there's still a couple of steps we need to go through before we can actually run a conversion. The first is launch that app with admin rights. So I'm going to walk through each of these so you can see what's happening. Where's he gone? Okay, it was there. There we go. Desktop app converter. Run as administrator. Yeah, I want to allow that to happen. And the observant among you with good eyesight will spot that this is a PowerShell command line. So once we've got that open, couple of steps to run through. So the first thing we need to do is bypass the standard Windows execution policy just while we're setting it up, because then we need to expand and install the base image with this command here. So we specify that we're setting up the base image, include a path to the WIM file that we've downloaded, and I tend to specify verbose at the end just so I can see that things are happening and nothing's going wrong. Now, that will take a little while. It does rely on containers, a Windows 10 feature that's not installed by default. So if you don't already have that installed, this process will take care of installing it. And because of that, it might walk you through rebooting your machine. If it does that, just give it a bit of time to get its ducks in a row when it comes back up, and it'll pick up where it left off and finish the process. Once you've been through all of those downloads and all of that setup, we're ready to start. So in the tradition of saying, here's one I prepared earlier, I'm going to go one step better and say, here's one someone else prepared earlier. There's a chap called, I think it's Matteo Pagani, who's done a series of blog posts on MSDN walking through this process, and I'll give you the reference for that afterwards because there are some that follow on from this, and it's a really good source of where you can go to take the next steps. So he's created a very simple Windows Forms program. All it does is it has one form with a button on it. You click the button, it runs this code. It's going to create a file called centennial.txt on the user's desktop and put that text in there. So if you want to go and have a look at the full source, it's there on GitHub, or you can just go straight to the MSI. So I've got that MSI downloaded, and that's what we'll use to convert. So I did go through the process of actually installing that MSI normally, and you see that you get a Forms app up and it all works as you're expecting. But we'll go through that once we've converted it. So at this point, we need to go back into that desktop converter tool, the PowerShell prompt that we saw earlier, and run this short command here. So I'll just walk through what all these parameters are. So it's calling out to the desktop app converter. The installer, to start with, points to the MSI that you want to convert. And then we get to specify the destination, the output folder where we want to put all the results. And we can give it a package name. And the publisher, if you're actually going as far as publishing in the store, then this is going to have to match your publisher identity. But for test purposes, we can put anything that starts with CN equals and doesn't contain a space. We'll give it a version, and then at the end, I'm specifying make appx, because that's what we want to do. We want to generate an appx installation file. Again, I tend to get it to give me a verbose output so I can see what's happening. And that minus sign at the end causes this process to automatically generate certificates and automatically sign the appx with those certificates. And we'll come back and use those certificates again a little later. The one thing I don't have specified here is there is an installer arguments parameter that you can use. If your MSI launches an installation wizard that requires user input, then that's not going to work for this. You need to be able to run a silent version. So if you've got that option and you need to do that, that's where you'd put the /s in the installer arguments to make sure you're using that. So let's take that for a spin. Bring up that command first of all. Yeah, the dark blue and black is not particularly clear even in the low light. So let's give that a go and see what happens. Okay, it doesn't like something. That should be a lowercase s for that minus sign. And from my practice run, I think I need to go delete the previous output. Right, bear with me a second. Okay, there we go. So here we can watch what this is doing. There will come a point where, so setting up the conversion environment, so it's, at this point it's going to spin up a virtual machine using that Windows image file that we've downloaded. So it's going to be a clean machine. Then it runs the installer in the isolated environment. It's running through the installation, monitoring it, getting what information it can from there. And it shouldn't be long until it's finished because it's not an enormous program. Okay, the installer's still running. I should have hooked up a drum roll, shouldn't I? Ah, there we go. Okay, sorting out the virtual file system entries. Making the apex, assigning the apex. And there we go. So we now have, from that MSI file, we've now got an Apex installation file that we can plug right into the UWP and Windows 10 ecosystem. And we can go and have a look at what that's created, because there should now be a new output folder in here. I've managed to get nested directories. So here we've got an Apex, and we can see the auto-generated certificate. So let's double-click that and go through the installation. So it's asking for full trust mode because it's trying to write a file to the desktop, which normally you wouldn't do from a UWP app. And now it's complaining about not having the right certificates installed to install it in full trust mode. So what we do there is we take this auto-generated certificate and install it. So I want to put that in the local machine. Yes, I'm sure. And I want to put it into Trusted Root Certificate Authorities, Certification Authorities. Okay, now that certificate is installed. I'll have to kill this and try it again. One-click install. Oh, excuse me. It's a problem when you practice beforehand. I've got it installed already. Yep. So you'll see there, I get a nice uninstall option and my nice clean uninstall. And then one last attempt at this simple one-click installation. And there we go. So if I launch that now, it still looks the way it did before. It still looks like a Forms app, but it's been installed as an Apex. It's running in a contained fashion the way it would if you'd written it as a UWP app. So what I'm just going to do now is let's bring up my desktop. and prove it is actually doing something. So there we go, we get centennial.txt, and this file was created by the Centennial app. Okay. Now, all of that came out of just running this one command over that MSI installation file that we had. So if all you want to do is take your MSI, package it up, that's the first step. Typically what you'll then do is, that's kind of, well, it is the first step towards becoming a fully fledged UWP app. And at this point you can start going and adding some UWP functionality to it. So I take a look at one of the simpler things. So the converted app contains an assets folder with default images inside. So let's just take a look at that. It's in package files. And assets. So you can see there we've got a bunch of tile apps just with what I always think of as standard empty envelope icon. So what we can do as a first step is start putting some tile images in there. Once we've done that, we haven't touched our source code, so we don't need to go and do a complete rebuild, regenerate the MSI, reconvert the MSI. We can just go and repackage the AppX and pull in the changes that we've got. Now, I've got a sample command line entry to do that. While I've been going through this the last couple of days, I've had some issues getting that to work and haven't yet got to the bottom of it, so I can't actually show that running, which I'd hope to be able to. But basically use make AppX and pass it a couple of parameters. So the first one, pack, specifies that we want to repackage. We then give it the name of the package files, the folder containing package files that we want to bring in and update, and then point it at the AppX that we want to generate, or the AppX that we want to update. Now that make AppX, if you've got Visual Studio installed, run up a Visual Studio command prompt, then you'll have access to it. If you don't have that, here's where you can find it. Yeah, I don't know if any of you can read that. That's program files x86, Windows kits /10/bin/x64. So as long as you can see that, you can do your repackaging. Now, once you've repackaged your AppX installation file like that, if you try and install it, then you'll hit some security issues again, like we did just now. That's because when we did the original conversion, that -sign parameter, that had to be the right case, did some of the heavy lifting. That auto-generated the certificate, and it used that certificate to sign the AppX file without us really needing to do anything else. This time around, we'll have recreated the package manually, regenerated the AppX manually, so we've got to go and re-sign it manually. And we can use sign tool executable supplied by the Windows 10 SDK to do this. Now we need the certificates, but because they were auto-generated for us for conversion, we can go back and pick those up and just reuse those. That was an interesting security thing here. If I run through these parameters, so /f, that's not the very first one, but the first one here, you want to point to the PFX file of the auto-generated certificate that came out of the original AppX generation. The next one, that /p, that's the password of that PFX file. Now, if you auto-generated your certificates using the desktop converter tool, that password is 123456. Now, I've since changed the combination on my luggage. And finally, we pointed out the Apex that we're wanting to sign. So that will go off and perform that final step for us. And once we've done that, we can then reinstall the app. If we're side loading, just reinstall the Apex like we just did, or we can push that out through the Windows Store. Now, because I wasn't actually able to demonstrate that, I'm going to reach the end a bit sooner than planned. But I'll run through the summary and then we'll just have a brief chat. So we looked at Project Centennial, what, how, and why, what you can do with it, what you can't do with it. A sample walkthrough to convert an MSI to an Apex, what you need in place to do that. The first steps you can take to put some modifications in and start taking advantage of the ecosystem that you're in. But what would you want to do after that? You want to start adding some specific things. So you want to start modifying your code. And often you get people who start, the first step will be to replace the UI and convert that over to XAML and have that as the first kind of step towards making it UWP. So this is a good point to give you the URL of the blog series that I referenced. That has a bunch more articles in it. In fact, I should have that up here. Okay, sorry, 1 second. So we get my virtual machine out of the way. And you can see there's a whole series here. Starting to enhance your desktop application, calling UWP APIs, and some of the other things that you can go on to do. Now, it does talk about when you're calling the UWP APIs, doing it in a conditional way so that you can continue to service your Windows 7 clients, but you're building in things that will kick in if you're on Windows 10. And yeah, I use the word legacy hesitantly there. I don't know that we can call Windows 10 legacy just yet because there's so much of it around. But if it's an older version than that, then yeah, let's use legacy. So yeah, so I've reached the end sooner than planned. So what I'll do is I'll hang around here. If anyone's got any questions, just come forwards and ask. I'll put up some of the standard Ignite slides. There are some great resources. I'm sure you've seen any other presentations. Channel 9 is always a great place to start. If you enjoyed this, then please fill in an evaluation. If you didn't enjoy it, then I don't mind if you do or not. And don't forget to get your wristbands. Thank you very much. I hope there was something in there useful for you. Thanks. Hey.
A couple of questions.
Yeah.
What's the cost in terms of size of the installer and as well of performances of your application?
Oh, after the conversion.
Yeah.
I've not looked at that on any complex apps. I know there are commercial entities using this to get into, as the first stepping stone to get into the Windows 10 ecosystem. Yeah, I've not heard of any major issues, but not seen any kind of side-by-side comparisons to give you a really accurate response.
And the virtualization, so for example, if you write in the registry, like that, it's done on the